Hey, just for a moment and listen closely. They laughed at you openly, without restraint. Not because you were entertaining, not because you invited humor, but because in their minds you posed no threat. You entered spaces and conversations stalled, not out of respect, but indifference. You were the one they overlooked, the one they assumed would never matter enough to challenge the room. You became easy to interrupt, easy to ignore, easy to talk over. They smiled at you without warmth, nodded without listening, dismissed you without thinking twice. You noticed how conversations changed when you tried to speak. Honestly, how eyes glazed over, how whispers followed behind forced laughter. They mistook your quiet for emptiness, your patience for submission, your calm for weakness. And for a long time, you allowed them to believe it. Not because you agreed, but because you weren't interested in proving anything. You weren't performing for approval. You weren't competing for attention. You were observing. You were tracking patterns, studying behaviors, memorizing flaws, learning the rules while they bragged about winning a game they barely understood. Lemja. You sat among inflated egos knowing full well you carried something sharper than all their noise combined. Yet you kept it concealed while they waved around fragile illusions of power. You let them underestimate. You smiled through condescension, nodded through disrespect, played the role they assigned you with unsettling precision. What they mistook for ignorance was restraint. What they mistook for fear was timing. Inside you, nothing was chaotic or loud. It was controlled, concentrated, and waiting. They never understood what it means to be dismissed so thoroughly that invisibility becomes an advantage. They never felt the weight of swallowing insult after insult, until silence itself becomes pressure, until restraint turns combustible. You weren't powerless, you were charging. And when the moment arrived, you didn't argue, or shout, or beg to be heard. You changed the entire atmosphere. One move, one shift, and everything they relied on collapsed. Confidence evaporated. Masks slipped. Suddenly, the joke had consequences, and you were no longer the subject. You were the author. This wasn't a breakdown. It was an awakening. Because silence, when chosen, is not weakness. It's strategy. And playing small isn't foolish when you're the only one thinking several steps ahead. They believed you had nothing until you revealed everything at once. Not with violence, but with precision. The damage wasn't physical, it was psychological. Reputations cracked, narratives unraveled. Rooms remembered you long after you left them. Only then did they scramble, revise their memories, pretend they had seen it coming. They hadn't. They were too consumed by their own voices to notice the presence they underestimated, sitting quietly nearby. What they will never confess is that they needed you small. They needed you silent, because your truth threatened the fragile structures they built from status, performance, and false certainty. Mandy, you showed them a form of power they don't recognize. The kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't beg for validation, doesn't need witnesses. The kind shaped by scars and clarity. The kind that watches arrogance self-destruct without lifting a hand. You were never meant to prove yourself. You were meant to remember who you were. And the moment you did, everything shifted. They thought they were controlling the narrative, but all along you were letting them expose themselves. Every backhanded compliment, every dismissive laugh, every moment you swallowed your anger became part of the foundation they dug beneath their own feet. You didn't lose yourself. You reclaimed yourself from beneath layers of minimization, gaslighting, and false concern. Bland, you were never foolish. You simply didn't need an audience. You needed clarity. And now they feel it. Not because you announced it, but because the energy in the room changed when you stopped shrinking. The laughter died. The confidence wavered. Suddenly, they're careful with their words, asking questions they should have asked sooner. It's too late. You're not damaged. You're done pretending. You didn't come to belong. You came to disrupt patterns, to close cycles, to remind the loudest voices why they once feared the quiet ones. You carry betrayal without bitterness and still speak truth without hesitation. You are not unstable. You are the force they hoped would never arrive. The outcast who learned the map. The silent one who stopped asking for permission. And they won't remember what they said about you, but they will never forget the moment you stood fully in yourself, calm and unflinching, with fire in your eyes. That's the part that haunts them. The moment the narrative reversed. The moment the one they dismissed began moving like the space belonged to them. The moment the narrative reversed. The moment the one they dismissed began moving like the space belonged to them. You can see it now, the fracture in their performance, because the version of you they relied on no longer exists. They used to interrupt you. Now they listen. They used to laugh. Now they hold their breath. Pond. Now they listen to every word you release into the air as if missing one might cost them everything. And in a way, it does, because the version of you they manipulated, minimized, and dismissed no longer exists. That softer, quieter self was laid to rest beneath years of pressure, disrespect, and unspoken battles, and you didn't mourn it. They don't know how to engage with you anymore because you no longer bend or hesitate. You don't flinch when tested. You don't shrink when challenged. You don't chase approval or seek reassurance. You move like someone who has stared straight into the ugliest truths of human nature and walked away unmoved. Like someone who learned to cry in silence and turned every ounce of that grief into clarity, precision, and resolve. You know the flavor of betrayal intimately, yet you speak truth without apology, as if it belongs to you by right. Pain no longer weighs you down. It fits you, shaped into armor by every rejection, every dismissal, every moment you were told you weren't enough and decided to prove nothing instead. Blend. Now they hesitate around you because your quiet isn't gentle anymore. It's honed. It carries weight. It slices through. It reminds you of every time you twisted yourself into smaller shapes just to make others comfortable, dimmed your light to avoid confrontation, held your breath to preserve harmony that was never yours to protect. You understand now that peace without dignity is captivity, and you refuse to remain inside it. You stopped cushioning egos that couldn't stand on their own. You stopped retreating into the background so insecure voices could feel taller. You don't owe anyone softness at the expense of your truth. You don't owe explanations to people who never listened. You don't dilute your reality to make it easier for others to digest. The moment you disrupted the system wasn't born from anger. It came from awareness. You saw that the structure itself was dishonest, designed to reward performance over integrity, noise over substance. You endured it long enough to understand it fully, then dismantled it without spectacle, without shouting, without seeking permission. Booleans. That is what real power looks like. It doesn't announce itself or demand recognition. It moves quietly and lands decisively. It enters a space and alters the atmosphere without effort. You aren't pursuing revenge. You're embodying consequence. You are proof of every overlooked soul they assumed would fade away, every quiet presence they tried to erase, every outsider they mocked when they believed no one was paying attention. You were paying attention. You saw everything, and you remembered. They misjudged the patience of someone denied a seat, never realizing that endurance sharpens perspective. So instead of asking for space, you became the foundation. Untouchable, unfiltered, undeniable. Each insult strengthened you. Each laugh sharpened your focus. You didn't fracture, you refined. What they taught you wasn't how to fight, but how to survive pressure without losing yourself. And that's far more dangerous. Your silence now functions as a reflection. When they face it, they're forced to confront every compromise they made, every mask they wore, every moment. They chose comfort over courage. They panic because the truth can't be rewritten once it's seen. You never raised your voice. You never pleaded. Collapsed into chaos. You evolved into something they only reference in hushed conversations. A presence that remains steady under scrutiny, that moves with controlled force, that dismantles illusions without explanation. You don't need to speak loudly to be felt. The illusion burns down on its own the moment you walk through the room. Bland. They truly believed they had finished you. They convinced themselves that whatever they buried would stay buried, that the pressure would crush you into silence forever. They were wrong. You were never gone. You were underneath it all, restrained by choice, refining yourself in the dark. You bit your tongue not out of fear, but calculation. You stayed low, not because you were broken, but because you were preparing. And when the moment arrived, you didn't announce yourself. You didn't ask for access or wait for approval. You rose without permission and occupied territory they swore was never meant for someone like you. Space they guarded with polite lies and closed ranks. Space they assumed was protected from memory, from accountability, from people who never forget. You stepped into it calmly, unapologetically, carrying the kind of presence that suffocates arrogance on contact. You weren't there to be accepted. You were there to expose what had been rotting beneath their performance all along. Bland. You are not the same force you once were. You no longer negotiate for belonging. You don't request inclusion. You move as if the structure itself owes you restitution for the years you were erased within it. You don't walk like a visitor. You walk like history lives in the walls. Like the floors remember the weight of everything you swallowed. Like the silence you carried still hums through the room. You didn't return to be liked. You returned because the version of you that stayed quiet reached its limit. That version got tired of suffocating on unspoken truth, tired of nodding along to narratives that erased you, tired of holding everyone else steady while your own foundation cracked unseen. You absorbed judgment, endured patronizing smiles, survived conversations where your words were treated like background static. They spoke over you with practiced superiority, dismissed your insight with amused smirks, reframed your pain as exaggeration, labeled your clarity as instability, and still you stayed composed. Still you observed. Still you learned. Blen, what they never realized was that while you appeared passive, you were recording everything, not emotionally but surgically, with precision, with patience, like pressure building beneath the surface of the earth. You learned how to exist inside discomfort without flinching, how to sit in fire without losing form, how to feel deeply. You carried your scars openly while they hid behind masks, filters, borrowed confidence, and empty applause. You watched them dismantle people who didn't conform, ridicule those who didn't bend, silence anyone who reflected too much truth back at them. For a while, you believed restraint might protect you, that if you stayed agreeable, stayed small, stayed careful, you'd be spared. But it never works that way. They sensed what you were becoming before you fully did. Power has a frequency, and insecure systems try to eliminate it before it matures. Land, you were never weak. You were contained, too disciplined to lash out prematurely, too aware to reveal yourself before the structure cracked on its own. They needed you manageable, grateful, quiet enough to decorate their illusion without threatening it. They could tolerate you existing only as long as you didn't embody your full weight. They didn't want you strong, didn't want you visible, didn't want you unfiltered and precise and undeniably real, because the fully realized version of you doesn't hesitate. That version doesn't seek reassurance. That version enters with smoke in the lungs and resolve in the eyes, grounded in knowing rather than questioning. That version doesn't ask whether it belongs. It knows it always exceeded the limits of rooms built by people who fear depth leans. When you finally broke the silence and let a glimpse of your edge show, the entire atmosphere shifted. The room reacted the way lies do when they're exposed. Uneasy, unstable, afraid of what comes next. They remembered how they treated you. Every dismissive joke, every sideways comment wrapped in fake humor. Every subtle move meant to keep you small. And in that moment, they understood something unsettling you remembered too. It was there in your eyes, in that steady, unblinking calm that said you heard everything and chose patience over reaction. That composure made you untouchable, not because you raised your voice, but because you endured. You outlasted every attempt to provoke you. Every backhanded compliment meant to keep you dependent. Every quiet effort to train you into compliance. And when you finally rose, you did it cleanly, without permission, without apology, without the need to explain yourself. That kind of independence confuses people who only know how to matter when someone else needs them. Please. They don't know how to respond to someone who no longer seeks approval. Someone who doesn't panic when ignored, doesn't collapse when abandoned, doesn't chase answers that were never owed. You don't hunt for closure anymore. You embody it. Your presence alone unsettles those who relied on your silence to feel powerful. You didn't just endure the storm. You became the force they hoped would never circle back into their lives. Because you saw through everything, the masks, the hierarchy built on fear, the fragile systems propped up by shallow praise. You recognized the strings behind the performance and cut them one by one, calmly, deliberately. You no longer operate by their rules. You became the disruption they couldn't control. The moment you stopped needing validation, the illusion began to collapse. Your silence once made them feel secure, superior, untouchable. But your full presence, unrestrained and grounded, shattered that comfort. You walk into familiar rooms now and the volume drops. Confidence. The same voices that once dominated the space grow careful, distracted, unsure. They feel it. They know they're standing in front of the person they once laughed at, the one who chose memory over revenge. Awareness. They sense that you're no longer interested in belonging or smoothing over discomfort. You're not here to make lies easier to digest or to shrink yourself so others can remain comfortable in mediocrity. You became too honest, too grounded, too real. And nothing frightens people more than someone who doesn't flinch when truth cuts. You used to question yourself, soften your words, apologize for your intensity, dim your insight, just to coexist with people who built their worth by limiting others. They called you excessive, emotional, difficult, when what they truly meant was uncontrollable. You saw too clearly. You couldn't be molded. You were never chaotic. You were precise. And clarity is dangerous to those who depend on confusion to survive. They hate that you figured it out, that the very traits they encouraged you to suppress were the ones they feared most. Your passion that couldn't be contained. Your pain that refused to be invalidated. Your memory that didn't rewrite itself for comfort. They wanted you disoriented, reactive, dependent, broken enough to obey but not strong enough to transform. Instead, you learned. You shed what no longer served you. You rebuilt yourself from the wreckage they left behind. Piece by uneven piece, without guidance, without applause, driven only by that steady internal rhythm telling you to keep moving forward. While it's you were rewiring yourself to stop apologizing for being intense in a world that thrives on surface-level calm. You transformed discomfort into authority, sensitivity into perception, trauma into a map that shows others how to escape their own confinement. And now the same people who once dismissed you watch closely, trying to realign themselves, rewriting history, attempting to stand near your growth as if they weren't the ones who tried to dim it. It's strange how quiet they become when you finally speak with certainty, how their memories falter when your truth disrupts their comfort. You aren't bitter. You're awake. You're wearing. You see patterns instantly. You sense shifts before words form. You no longer offer access to people who can't respect growth. You stopped begging for crumbs from those who can't nourish themselves. You stopped translating your fire for people who have only ever known smoke. You move differently now, not from arrogance, but from remembrance. You remember what it felt like to be invisible in spaces you were holding together, and you will never return to that version of yourself again.